Welcome back to part 6 of Ted Greene's Chord Chemistry series right here at Jason Carey Guitar on YouTube. It's really nice to see you again. And if you're new here, this is part 6. You can find all of the other parts in the Ted Greene, the Chord Chemistry playlist on this channel. Every chord has a certain combination of tones that distinguishes it from every other chord. If you don't have the book, it's a good idea to grab the book because I'm reading directly from the book. We could go through it together line by line, and it's going to be a little bit of an effort, but this is just such a massive, massive treasure trove of goodness, So let's continue on. These tones may be derived from the major scale with the same root as the chord name. For instance, any minor chord always has the root, flatted third, and fifth tones of the major scale with the same letter name. For example, like an E would be E flat 3 and then 5, right? Or 1 flat 3 and then 5 would be E, G, and B. Well, if the major scale had the same root note, it would be 1, 2, 3, major 3. So what we're going to do is alter that major scale with a major third, flat the third to make it minor. Really cool minor sounds. Therefore, an A minor chord has the notes A, C, and E, since they are the root, flat 3, and fifth of the A major scale. Remember that the regular third of the A major scale is C sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, whole, up a whole, that's 1, 2, 3. So we're going to take that 3 and flatten it and lower it by a half step. And that becomes our minor third, or sad third. We have that C sharp being flattened to the flatted third, which is C. The particular group of tones that is used for the construction of a particular kind of chord is called the formula of the chord, which we are going to cover in this video. It's a pretty dense few pages here, so we'll be careful not to overdo it all at one sitting. Or any chord that has 3 tones in the formula is called a triad. So hello, 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 the root 3, 5. On page 11 is a list of formulas of the most commonly used chords. We're going to review all of that. They are divided into 3 categories or families. The major, minor, and dominant 7th chords are the fathers of the 3 families. And all the other chords, with a few exceptions, are derived from them. When tones are added to any of the 3 basic chords, the resulting chords are called extensions. For example, C minor 7 is an extension of C minor because the flatted 7th. All right, so the C minor triad is going to be C, E flat, and G. If we wanted to use another third, stack another third on the top of that, we have a flatted 7th on the top of that, which is a B flat. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's basically extending the function of that minor triad. C minor 7 is an extension of C minor because the flatted 7th, or B flat, is added to the basic C minor chord to make the C minor 7. So we have the C minor chord and then the C minor 7. It's an extended sound. In other words, 1 flat 3 5 becomes 1 flat 3 5 becomes 1 flat 3 5 flat 7, not major 7, which is pretty cool. We'll get into that stuff later. Any chord that has a flatted 5th, sharp 5th, flatted 9th, or sharp 9 in the formula is called an altered chord. Any chord that has the 3rd replaced by the 4th is called a suspended chord. Any chord may be played with different arrangements of tones in the formulas. These different ways to play the same chord are called inversions or voicings. The terms 9th, 11th, and 13th, they are the same letter names as the 2nd, 4th, and 6th. Now the terms 9th, 11th, and 13th are a carryover from piano theory. These higher notes were to be played in the right hand or the higher octaves. On the guitar, they're usually played near the top of a chord, but sometimes the 9th and the 11th are even played in the bass. So it's just due to tradition that they're still called the 9th, 11th, and 13th, as opposed to 2, 4, and 6. For example, in a 13th chord, you may refer to the 13th chord or the 13th tone as a 6th. You could use that instead, right? It doesn't really matter. However, when using the sharp 9, it's usually put above the 3rd in a chord, not below, such as in chords like 7 sharp 9 or 7 sharp 9 sharp 5, etc. And the augmented 11 is usually put above the 5th in a chord, assuming there is a 5th being played, as in chords like sharp 11 or 13 sharp 11, etc. Now don't get too worried, because we're going to spell all of this stuff out and walk through all of this, okay? Likewise, the 6th or the 13th is hardly ever put below a flatted 7th. When you get to section 7, you'll be able to observe these things clearly if you have learned your major scales. If you have learned your major scales, yeah, operative sentence there. And since there are so many inversions on the guitar, a systematic way of remembering them would seem to be practical. The way suggested in this particular book, Chord Chemistry, is according to the strings being used in the chord. This works best with chords whose formulas contain 3 or 4 tones, and can be explained as follows. Starting with a 3 or 4 note chord, raise each tone in the chord on the same string up to the next higher tone in the chord. Let's do an example with E minor. So we have E minor. So the bass note G, we have an E minor, which is basically 1, 1, flat 3, 5. We have a 1, an E, a G is a flatted 3rd, and the 5 is the B. The bass note G is the flatted 3rd of the chord, so staying on the 6th string, you would move it up to the 5th, which is B of the chord. The root on the 4th string would move up to the flatted 3 or a G on the same string, and finally the 5th would move up to the root E on the same string. You would then have the following chord. If you followed the same logic with this chord, you would get the following chord, which is root. The 5 moves up to the root. The flatted 3 moves up to the 5, and the root moves up to the flatted 3. So we have the 5, or the root, 5, and flatted 3. Following the same logic still once more, you would get to the first form again, but 12 frets higher or an octave higher. So a rule can be derived from this exercise. That is, that any 3-note chord or triad has only 3 different forms on the same set of strings. Try doing the above exercise with some of the triads listed in the chord reference charts coming up. However, notice that if you start with a chord high on the neck, you will have to work in reverse. That is, lowering each tone on the same string to the next tone in the chord. And likewise, if you start with a chord in the middle of the neck, you will have to both lower and raise the notes of the chord. Again, staying on the same set of strings. But regardless of where you start, you will still get 3 forms from a triad on the same set of strings. 3 forms is really important because, we only have 3 different shapes within one octave, and then they repeat the shapes again. Using the same logic for a 4-note chord, you will find there are 4 forms of any 4-note chord on the same set of strings. For example, A dominant 7th chord is a 4-note chord. There are 4 tones in the formula: 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. So starting arbitrarily with an E7, you could build the following chords on the same set of strings. So let's do that. Let's start on position number 5 from the book. We'll get this fired up here. So we have a 5 in the bass. We have the root, the 5. Now we're on position 5, right? We have third finger covering fret 7 on the low E string. We have finger 2 covering the third on the D string. We have finger 4 covering the flatted 7th on the G string, and we have finger 1 covering the root note on the B string. Now, if we followed that program, so for each set of strings, like 6, 5, 4, 3, or 6, 3, 2, 1, or 5, 3, 2, 1, etc., you could memorize 4 inversions. But for now, we'll just keep going. The next one that we're working down to grab we're working again with the same 4 notes, or we're the same 4 notes on the same string grouping, right? So we're having, right now it's string number 6, 4, 3, and 2. So 6, 4, 3, 2 is the string grouping that we're using for these shapes. The first one that we used was with the 5th in the bass. Now we have the 3rd in the bass, followed by the root note and the 5th and the flatted 7. Then we can go back up to move every one of these notes. So that, for example, that 5 will go up to the flatted 7, that 3 will go up to the 5, and then that flatted 7 will go up to the 1, and that 1 will go up to the 3, right? So we have to remember where those notes are going to be, and then just run up there and grab them. So moving along, we'll move to position number 12, where we move from the flatted 7 to 1, the 5 to the flat 7, the 1 to the 3, and the 3 to the 5, and we find ourselves at E7 yet once again. So we have 4 different shapes. We have this one with the 3rd in the bass, this one with the 5 in the bass, this one with the 7th flatted in the bass, and this one with the root note in the bass. So for each set of strings, like the 6, 5, 4, 3, or 6, 3, 2, 1, or 5, 3, 2, 1, etc., you could memorize 4 inversions for each one. However, some inversions on certain sets of strings are not practical. So the good inversions have already been worked out for you and listed in the chord reference charts. That's something that Ted Greene did for us, and he left it for us, and we're going to definitely benefit from that. The chords with 5 and 6 notes in the formulae are not very well suited to this logic because too many of the inversions are not pleasing to the ears or the hands. But certain 5-note chords, such as the 9th, can be used when you leave out the root. So that's something we'll talk about as well. Just kind of what happens when we leave the root note out of the chord, because it's not really needed to be played. The bass player will often play the root note. So this is acceptable because actually in any chord with 5 tones in the formula, the root or 5th is often omitted, and possibly one of the remaining tones is doubled. Although this is not necessary, by doubled, it is meant repeated, and this is done most often in 3 and 4 note chords. For examples, we have this minor chord with 3 notes or 3 tones in the formula. So we have, starting with that second position, we have that E or E minor, right? We have the G, the flatted 3, the root note, the 5, and then the root note again is doubled. That's interesting, right? The dominant is a 4-note chord in the formula, so it's 4 tones in the formula. So we have 5, which is position 5. We have the root note, the 5, the flatted 7, the 3, the 5, and the 1. So we have 1, 2 root notes, and 2 fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then, so we have 2 notes doubled. The first version of that E minor, we had 2 root notes. We had an E note here, another E note there, right? And then 2 roots and 2 fifths. It still sounds cool. In chords with 6 tones in the formula, both the root and 5th may be omitted. This is heavy stuff, and it takes a minute for it to sink in sometimes, so push pause or rewind and think about it. And as with other chords, any of the remaining tones may be doubled. However, in either a 5 or 6 note chord, if the fifth is altered, that is sharped or flatted, you may not leave it out as it is essential to the chord. You could still leave out the root though. For example, in a 7, flat 9, flat 5 chord, you could leave out the root, but not the flat 5. Sometimes the fifth can even be left out of 4-note chords. You must experiment with this to get ideas where it might be appropriate. Very rarely the root is left out of 4-note chords. In chords that have the 11th tone, the third is often omitted, particularly in the 11th chord itself. Also, you may try leaving out the third in any chord and possibly replace it with a second or fourth. So those are some suggestions of how to deal with all of this stuff, how to deal with all of these notes and all of these formulas and all of these voicings. And this is a systematic approach to this. It's just preparing our minds to absorb what's to come, okay? And we have kind of got off the deep end a little bit in this chapter. We could just keep going now if you'd like. Just hang out. I'm going to literally list out all of the formulas. These are the formulas for the 3 basic chords and extensions. So 3 basic chords and extensions. We have major, minor, and dominant. We have common names, we have symbols, we have the formulas. I am going to read through all of the major chord formulas for you, and I am going to place a tile on the screen right now. So we have a common symbol, a name, and a formula. So the major chord has the formula of 1, 3, 5, which is in the key of C, a C, an E, and a G, a 1, a 3, and a 5. And I'm going to use C for all of these. For the major 6, we have the 1, 3, 5, and 6. Major 7th, we have the 1, 3, 5, and 7. Major 9, we have the 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And then the major added 9, we have a 1, 3, 5, and 9, which is a really cool voicing. So the major 6, 9 is a 1, 3, 5, 6, 9. The major 7, 6 is a 1, 3, 5, 6, 7. We could do that on the guitar, right? So we have. That's with the first finger pointing to on actually playing fret number 8. We have the thumb doing all of the strumming, right? So we have the thumb behind the scenes here coming down through the string sets. 1, 3, 5, 6, 7. That's pretty cool. The major 13 is the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then the 13 on the top. So there's some really big formulas here. The minor shape, here's the tile for that. The common name, symbol, and the symbols, and all of that stuff you can look at. The name and the formula is what we'll talk about. And the minor is the 1, flat 3, and then 5. The minor 6 is 1, flat 3, 5, and then a 6. The minor 7th is a 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. The minor 9th is a 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, and then a 9 on the top of that, which we can get with a little bit of effort on the guitar, right? With a little bit of stretching exercise. If you want those, let me know. Minor 11 is 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9, and then which would be an 11, which would be an F up here. The minor add 9 is 1, flat 3, 5, and then 9 on the top of that. So we have these really beautiful voicings. The minor 6, 9 is 1, flat 3, 5. We'd add the 6 and the 9 on top of that. The minor major 7th, which would be 1, flat 3, 5, and then major 7, or natural 7th, 1, flat 3, 5, 7. The minor major 9 is the 1, flat 3, 5, 7, 9. And let's take a quick look. You can hear how deep and rich all of these formulas are, right? How functional they can be and how these are going to impact our playing longitudinally over the span of our guitar lives and musical lives. And if you're a bassist, like I know some of us are, it's just all going to impact us deeply, okay? The dominant seventh tile, let's get to work on that. We have the name, which is dominant 7, which has the formula of 1. It's a 4-note chord to begin with, so we have 1 flat, the 1, 3, 5, and then flatted 7th. The dominant 7th with a 6 in it is just the same as 1, 3, 5, flat 7, but we have a 6 in it. So we use 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and then we'd have to find a 6 in there somewhere, right? So we're going to talk about how to do all of this later, but right now we're just laying out the chord names and the formulas. So the dominant 7, 11, which would be 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and then an F on the top of that. The dominant 7th suspended is going to be 1, 4, 5, flat 7. The dominant 9th is spelled out 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and then 9 on the top. The dominant 11th is 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11 on the top. Dominant 13 is 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, and 13 on the top. Dominant 13th suspended is 1, 4, 5, flat 7, 9, and then 13. So the dominant 7 with a 6th and an 11 in it is the 1, 3, 5, flatted 7, and then the 11, and then the 13. The diminished 7th is another one we need to know. 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. So we have 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7, or the 6th, right? But we'll call it the double flatted 7th. The augmented is 1, 3, and sharp 5. So that covers all of the chord formulas. I know it's a lot to absorb, but we have the tiles that you can refer back to, the major, the minor, and the dominant 7th. We walked through those and we literally heard all of those played out and spelled out. Now, I have a few notes, just 3 notes here to cover with you before we break for today. And it looks like we're going to get that whole chapter in one video, which is crazy. The notes here that Ted leaves for us at the last page of that chapter, the altered chords are not listed here, but they mean just what they say. For instance, a C7 flat 9 flat 5 would be a C7 chord with the 5th flatted and a flatted 9th added. In other words, the formula would be 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7, flat 9. So number 2, the diminished and augmented chords do not really fit into any of the families, okay? But they are the most like the dominant chords in the way that they are used, as you will see. So remember that. Number 3, remember that the 9, 11, and 13 tones may be thought of as the 2, 4, and 6, and vice versa. So the above formulas that have the tones may be written 2 ways. For example, a 7-6 chord could be written as 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and 13. So that's all we're doing for today. We're cutting there. I know you can handle this, and I know you're just going to use it as a resource, so be sure to mark this video. And if you don't have the book yet, go ahead and grab the book. And if you'd like to, you can become a member of the channel. You can enjoy some of the perks that we have there. If you have any questions or any comments about this is kind of getting us off into the deep end of the book, so I definitely want to take care so that we're not losing those of us who could really shine by getting through the book. So let me know what you're having for challenges, your successes. Let us all know, because we're all going to learn together. That's it for today, and thank you so much for coming by, and we'll see you next time. But until then, happy picking.